Welcome to Dancing in the World, the podcast where we reveal cultural confluences. I am Sinclair Morgane.
And I'm Kate Spanos.
Today we're joined with Dr. Chris Ugolo, Professor of African Dance at the University of Benin in Nigeria, Benin City. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. We're excited to have you.
Thank you, Sinclair. Thank you, Kate.
So I would jump off to say that Professor Golo was actually my college professor back in the days, and he saw me grow up in front of him, and now I'm a professor myself, assistant professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and we've been writing this book so far, and we just wanted to draw Dr. Ogolo in, given his experience with dance as a global practice. He studied in England and Nigeria as well, so he has this multicultural perspective about dance and the types of issues we've been dealing with during the book writing. I would just say, Doctor, introduce yourself and tell us what you think about our book so far.
Well, I am Professor Chris Ugolo, Professor of African Dance at the University of Benin here in Nigeria. I believe I was privileged to encounter and to review the book, Dancing in the World, by Sinclair Ogagawene, Morgane, and Kate. I was privileged to have reviewed that book, and I was really excited about it, particularly the content, as it had to do with their experiences practicing dance in the United States of America, where they had problems with, I guess, institutional problems with acceptance, and how they've been fighting it, and how they have come up with a book to document their experiences. And I was really excited because I had experienced such challenges too when I did my postgraduate program in England some years back, and anticipated such problems. And so I was quite familiar with the issues they were dealing with in the book, Dancing in the World. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what those experiences were? And I guess I'd be interested too, since I don't know you well, we're just meeting this weekend. But what took you to England in the first place? And what were some of the challenges?
Okay, well, I had just finished my undergraduate. Actually, I was mentored by one Professor Georgina Gore. She's a British who spent a number of years here in Nigeria lecturing at various universities. And she was at the University of Benin as a dance lecturer. She's a dance anthropologist, actually. So she was my mentor. She taught me. And at my graduation, she asked, would you like to go to Britain and do a postgraduate? I said, why not? So she worked out a scholarship for me, a Commonwealth scholarship. And that took me to Britain at the University of Surrey, Guildford in England, where I did a master's degree program at the university, and did my project on the development of Black dance in Britain. Having read a book, Developing the Black Dance in America, and I felt, why not? Let me see what the black people are experiencing in England. And my project supervisor approved it, and I went into the field. I did my research. So it was in the process of carrying out my research that I came across these experiences that you talked about in your book. And so I'm quite familiar with the issues that you dealt with in the dancing world, because there are issues also that Black people experience in Britain. And so I'm quite familiar with those issues. Yes.
Yes, I was just going to say, Doctor, that the experiences, the black experiences, are still the same. I know there's been a lot of work done. We've seen gradual progress, and I think we really didn't want to center this conversation around black experiences, diasporic experiences in America, but just thinking more generally how, many underrepresented groups may be marginalized in ways that we may have not considered before, and meaning that we're thinking this happens in Nigeria, and Kate experiencing that in Ireland, as someone who traveled to Ireland to study, how this conversation is really global. And I think our title of Dancing in the World makes sense that way because we're just thinking about how this conversation is global and we're fighting something much bigger. And so I think where I'm going with this is, if we think about Nigeria, what are the types of conversation happening, with representation, valuing different types of dances, etc. What's happening in Nigeria, if we can tie that into our conversation here?
Well, Nigeria, as you're quite aware, Sinclair, is a multi-ethnic and multicultural society. In fact, we are blessed by the varieties of cultures and ethnic groups that we have in Nigeria. It's said in Nigeria we have more than 500 ethnic groups. That's quite large, and it's as a result of how Nigeria was put together by the colonial masters, Britain especially. So the experiences in terms of culture, yes, we have wide varieties of culture in Nigeria. We have majority ethnic groups, we have minority ethnic groups. So the minority ethnic groups are also struggling to be recognized, so to say, within the ambit of the majority ethnic groups, But what is interesting here is that because we are all blacks, and because we all belong to one country, one nation, and also because of the fact that our cultures are similar in some kinds of ways. It's the distinction of cultural differences is not too wide, like it may be in America or in Britain. So to a large extent, we understand ourselves in terms of cultural differences, except that that dance to a large extent is a universal language. So for us in Nigeria here, our dances have some kind of characteristics that are similar. So if you see, for instance, a Bini dance, and if you see an Urhobo dance, the differences may not be much, as you say. So we can accommodate and tolerate ourselves, so to say. And the government itself has provided a level playing ground where all the cultures are exhibited. Here in Nigeria also we have what we call the National Festival of Arts and Culture, where all the groups come together at a point in time yearly and exhibit their different culture. These are aimed at unifying the differences in cultures that we have, and also to see how the country can be integrated, so to say, through culture. And so to a large extent, I believe that the challenges we have here, they are not as difficult as what we see out there or what I see in your dancing world, or what I can read in your dancing world. Just that we have multicultures, and we are seeing how we can negotiate and come to something that will be acceptable. In fact, that's my area of research. How Nigeria, as a multicultural society, can negotiate and come out with what we may call a national culture of dance performance and dance choreography.
What are some of the challenges with finding that national culture? You're saying that so many of the cultures are similar in certain ways, but I imagine that if you're in the culture, you would notice marked differences between them. And so I'm interested in what your process is in kind of identifying those unique markings for each dance, and then how you negotiate, or how whoever is defining the national culture kind of negotiates those different things to say, oh, we're going to take from this one, we're going to take from this one, we're not going to take from that one. What does that process look like for you?
Well, it's a problem, but I believe that we have one of our great choreographers, Chief Hubert Ogunde, who was the first artistic director of the National Troupe of Nigeria. He carried out an experiment. When he was given the task of creating a national dance troupe, what he did was to travel around the country, and he invited cultural groups from different parts of the country, the heads of the different groups. He brought all of them together in a camp, and they stayed together, and he created a dance performance out of it. What he tried to do was to see how the similarities of the different cultures can be brought together in one production. And so he took from this culture, he took from this culture, he took from this culture, and tried to come out with something that was kind of representative, using his Yoruba background, because he is Yoruba, one of the major ethnic groups in Nigeria. So you find in a production, for instance, that he experimented with, you find beat of what he did. For instance, if I give an example from a production that he did, he started it from the Yoruba land. It was like a journey, and the journey took him through Yoruba land to Edo land, and to Efik, and to the Igbo culture. And at each point he arrived at, you saw the cultures coming in to exhibit what they had. So within a production, you had a variety of cultures, so to say, being exhibited within one performance. But for me, I found that was a little bit limiting. I found that how many cultures are you going to exhibit within one performance? For instance, we have over 500 ethnic groups in Nigeria. Are you going to be able to put together 500 ethnic groups in one performance? That was kind of impossible, because what that will do is that some ethnic groups will find that they are not represented. And so there is, in Nigeria here, we have this agitation by the minority groups that they are not well represented in cultural presentations, and even in the politics of the country. The minority groups feel that they are underrepresented. And this, to a large extent, has created some kind of tension where you have conflict between the different groups and all that. So what I am thinking, that experiment falls into what the cultural theory of multiculturalism, that gives room for different cultures to sort of be exhibited. But what I'm thinking, what my research was targeted at, was to look at the cultural theory of liberal pluralism. That one sort of recognizes each cultural group in its own merit. And so what that will do at the end of the day will be some kind of harmonization of movements and traits and all that, bringing them together without necessarily bringing out the cultural manifestations in terms of costumes, in terms of songs, in terms of props and all that, but using some kind of national icons to portray the movements, the characteristics that are similar and harmonize them. So it's a kind of harmonization of movement traits across cultures, but then using national icons to bring them under one umbrella of the country called Nigeria, for instance. That's the kind of research I'm into currently, and I hope that it will make sense and come out with something that will be acceptable to all.
No, this is fascinating, Doctor. I think you just hit the nail on the head by your last statement about using national icon. And when I talk about national icons, I'm thinking about those little sign symbols that really identify as a people.
Yes.
What we find in America is that those icons, we have been using the term identity a lot. Those icons are kind of what presents itself as a surface for rejection and different types of aesthetic resistance, right? So my national icon, if I performed it here, people, first of all, do not understand what it is. Some people want to see it for just the exotism of it. Some people completely do not want to associate themselves with that, or they say it's too black, it's too African. And so in America, while, it makes me happy that you're doing this work, but I can see how Nigeria gets here, right? Nigeria is a country that through colonization had to be together, had to live together. After our war, the Civil War in 67 to 70, it made sense that Nigeria as a country need to survive. And so dance for me was something that really united us. And dance, I would say dance through patriotism that came out of colonization and that kind of nationalism that came out. Dance stood to be something that brought us together. And the government involvement in it was a huge deal, because government saying, and like you said, providing a level playing field. I performed at, some of the NAFEST, the National Arts Festival, and it's just incredible, and we wrote that in the book, what you feel when you go and experience this many cultures. That is something that does not exist in many places around the world. Maybe we could incorporate that in our American system here. Maybe think about a global way of presenting multiple cultures. And train our younger people to begin to appreciate what diversity really looks like. We talk about it, but we don't perform it. So I think an event like that it might be great to have, Yeah, what do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's difficult, right? Because the idea of just getting a bunch of people to get on stage and perform their cultures, sometimes in the U.S., in my experience, has been just kind of like the people that support the Irish dancers come and watch the Irish dancers and then they leave. And then the people that do, I've done so many of these kinds of multicultural festivals here in the U.S. And it's it feels like the only space where we're allowed to express our cultures, but only our own people kind of care, or outsiders only want to see the virtuosic version of what we do. And there's so much nuance to what we do, and it's really, really hard to convince people to care and also to educate them on those nuances. And so I'm actually interested at the NAFEST festival, which Sinclair has told me about. People, it sounds like, are going prepared to appreciate what other groups are doing. And I don't, it's not that I've had the experience that people don't appreciate it, but there's just not like an openness to really understanding all of the different, because sometimes aesthetic values can be so different across cultures. there's a complete misunderstanding. And so virtuosity is what people kind of rely on. So I'm wondering if, how is NAFest kind of constructed in order to create that, can we call it a confluent space, in order for people to negotiate those things?
Well, the idea behind NAFest actually is to bring about cultural unity, is to bring about unity in the country because of the cultural diversity. So the government thought that one way of uniting the country is by bringing the different cultures together on the same platform and bring about they can exhibit their products in a maybe sometimes competitive way. It used to be competitive, but they've removed that competitive aspect of it. Okay. So it's now more of exhibition, so to say. The cultural festival sort of provides all the states. We have about 36 states in Nigeria, and all the states are given opportunity to come with a group representing that part of the country. The states also have the opportunity to decide on what culture they want to represent. For example, within a state, you may have about 20 to 30 different cultures. Mm-hmm. So in the process of selection, they may come up with one which they take to the national level. So at the national level, days are provided either for dances. There are days they may focus on dance this year. And in that festival, the platform is given for each state to deal with an issue, maybe issue of unity using culture, and exhibit it through that platform. And so the states exhibit, put up their production, then another state comes on stage. So each night, running for a week, you have all the states coming out to showcase what they have culturally, so to say. And all the states also have the opportunity to watch each other and interact with each other. So the festival also provides a platform for not just the cultural exhibition, but for individuals to meet themselves from different parts of the country, make friends, and at the end of the day, go back home. And so it provides an opportunity for people to appreciate each other's culture. Mm-hmm. And in the process of appreciating each other's culture, it gives room for tolerance. It gives room for acceptability. It's when I understand your culture that I will appreciate it, so to say. And so when groups begin to see this kind of exhibition, it brings about the fact that people now begin to understand themselves better because of the fact that they now understand each other's culture. Mm-hmm. And that understanding is what gives the room for some kind of unity. I believe that's the intent. That's why the government puts it together. And I hope that they achieve that. But in terms of choreography, it's a different ballgame.
I was going to say to Kate, I think there was a production. I hope I'm using this term right, a production of events. And I think it's not saying dance groups just putting themselves together and going, it was the state is commissioned to pay people professionally to train for this event. Mm-hmm. So it was something people looked forward to. Like, I remember we'll rehearse with Doctor in the studio for 3 months, going there every day, and just dancing and walking. And that is you will be trained. Your body will be strong. You will perform. Mm-hmm. There was you will display the virtuosity because you trained for it, right? The state provides the money, the funding to have that. And everyone in the country is doing the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. So on the event, you're ready to show your culture and you're coming with cultural pride. Yeah. There's something about cultural pride that draws people to see you. Like if you invite a Brazilian group from Brazil and they're showing up, people will go. It doesn't matter if it's Brazilian, if it's a thing that the United States is putting together, people will go. And that's what is happening in Nigeria with this NAFES event. Sometimes it's like, I remember we had one in Niger State, in Minna, which is kind of away from Abuja, the capital, but people showed up. It was just a lot of people, and you could see the pride from everyone saying, "Ooh, we are ready. We have this." They want, and people are excited to see what you bring, and that is so different from the American experience, right? Because the government, first of all, does not support the art in that way, so people sometimes are just called upon to come do a show. And I mean, you can't compare that to something that the whole state is putting together.
Yeah.
So that's a different feel.
Yeah.
But if the United States can go there to that point where they can facilitate and build cultures in different states, that'll be amazing.
Yeah.
People would do it.
Yeah. And Professor, what was your experience in Great Britain when you went there? And, how is Nigerian cultures, multiple cultures, how were they kind of performed or expressed in what you saw when you were in Britain?
Well, in Britain, it's not that, Nigerian culture is expressed in any way, but yes, there was this choreographer, Peter Badejo. He is a prominent Nigerian choreographer. He was trained in the U.S. too. He graduated in one of the colleges in the U.S., but also now moved to Britain and had his own group there and was performing. So I had the opportunity of watching about 2 of his productions in London, a few nights. The truth is that in Britain, for Black dance, what happens is that there were a lot of Black dance companies, so to say, from different parts of the continent who come occasionally to their national troops to present. From the Caribbean also, you have groups coming from the Caribbean. You have groups that have settled in Britain for a long time who are also performing. So you have all categories of different people performing Black dance in Britain. So it's not just one country. So you have groups that have stayed there for a long time. Most of the time, the groups there were people who traveled from their country, and when they came to Britain, they decided to stay back. They didn't go back home with their troops. They settled and they set up companies at the grassroots level, at the community level, and started working. And in that way, they had a lot of problems. Problems of recognition in the first place, problems of funding, problems of the host community accepting them as people who had an artwork, so to say, to exhibit. And so there was also lack of understanding of the kind of things they were doing, because for them, the host community, they didn't quite understand what African dance is. That's the way I saw it. It has to do with the issue of definition of dance, because the way we perform dance in Africa here is quite different from the way dance is performed in Europe, and the way we see dance too is quite different from the way they see dance. For us, our dance expression is carried out at different levels. For instance, we don't separate music from dance, from drama, from costume, from prop. We integrate all the art forms in our performance, so to say. And that, I believe, looks a little bit alien to the white community in terms of a cultural expression. And because of that lack of understanding of the manifestation of African dance, which they don't quite understand, in terms of funding, they are not provided for. It's the Art Council of Great Britain that gives out funding. And in the funding institutions, the Black people are not represented. In government policies where issues of where do we fund, which do we fund, the Black people are not represented. So at the end of the day, what trickles down to the Black committee looks like, well, let's just give them something so that they don't, but because if you compare the funding that they give to the ballet company, the Royal Ballet, for instance, of England, if you look at the funding they give to them, which runs into millions of pounds, and you consider it in line with what trickles down to the African performances at the grassroots, is a pittance. So there is a lot of discrimination, so to say, in terms of funding. And when the funds are not there, what can you do? So that's the greatest problem. And then where do they perform? The structures where they perform, the theaters. They can't go up high there to the big theaters, for instance. Right. They have what we call the fringe theaters, the small theaters in the communities where they are permitted to do their performances. And they can't rise up there because they can't even pay their workers, their dancers, all through the year. So they just come together, put performances together, maybe go to schools and do some kind of cultural exhibitions and things like that. And at the end of the day, that is not, they are not able to sustain that kind of thing and make a good living out of it. So those are the challenges, actually, that Black dancers face in Britain that I saw in my study there.
Yeah, and just thinking about how that will limit the growth of the form, the development of the form. If you don't have a sustainable practice, then the form cannot develop. So we have many years of Black dancers coming off as unprofessional, like they don't know what they're saying because they haven't grown their form in a way that is professional, like in a way that is standardized. So I'm curious if I think one thing I'm struggling with is, well, I'm struggling with everything, right?
One thing.
Oh, boy.
I believe it basically has to do with understanding of what your form is.
Yeah.
And when there is no understanding, there will be no funding.
Yeah, I will go with what Hubert Ogunde tried to describe in the in the 80s, where he said Nigerian audience will show up at the theater and they will be performing with you on stage. If you say something that they don't agree with, they will shout.
Yes, actually, and that's our culture. Culturally at the community level, it's difficult to separate the audience from the performer, because the performer is at liberty to jump into the performance and maybe also take have his way in the performance, and you can't stop him, So it's our cultural ethics, so to say. The audience is at liberty. For instance, in the Western world, when there's a performance, everybody is just seated and just watching, and at the end, you just clap and appreciate them, and that's it. But here in Nigeria, the audience will shout and jump up and even want to jump on the stage. So that's the difference here, yeah.
And that's a fundamental question about space that we've been talking so much about in the book and in the podcast is just we have to rethink how to configure spaces for different art forms. Not all of them are going to work on a stage with the performer separate from the audience. And it's not just African dance either, or I even see it as kind of in my case, for Irish dancing, there are some forms that absolutely work best on a stage. There's shows like Riverdance that belong on stage. But there's also the community-based forms where people will just jump in or, grab a pint and start dancing and then walk away and catch up with friends. And so we have to think about the value systems for these different spaces that dances take place in.
So in America or in the West, we actually see a lot of spaces, like $1 million spaces designed for dance. And the question is, why can't you go in there and dance? What's your problem, right? Why we built this for dance and you're saying you cannot dance there? Do you want us to build a different space for you? And I think the definition of dance is so limiting. And in Nigeria, as you have said, sir, is, we understand dance from a very different place. The way we experience dance in the community and feel that we've experienced dance can be the same way we go into a theater and experience dance and go, wow, that's the same thing. It's like the same feeling. So there's no separation. If you experience ballet on the street, you will never go into a ballet theater and watch ballet and say they're the same thing. And that sensibility is so starkly different as experience from the both areas. And this is why, we're having a conversation like this saying, how do we make people understand that these are different value systems? And it affects us. We did a show recently where somebody asked us, so what is that? And in our head, that was an incredibly innovative thing that we've done. So Kate and I and Pablo put on this Brazilian show, Irish dancing, Nigerian music, and we just made a show out of it. And to think that we pulled from all these cultures, like you're saying about Hubert Ogunde, who tried to do this impossible thing about bringing this multicultural thing together, and how hard it is to do. We did this in a week, and we had a blast, and it was a seamless show. We didn't have a moment where Pablo felt like that didn't work out. Kate didn't feel like, oh, that was a horrible thing. I didn't feel like, oh, Nigeria was being bastardized in any way. It worked. It was a cohesive performance, and we all felt represented, and somebody said, what is that? And this is like cultures from three different continents being put together. And in my head, I have also seen performances that were done in that theater that were mostly improvisation, and people thought that was the best thing they've ever seen. And I am thinking to myself, if they don't value what we're bringing, what we're bringing is good stuff. If they don't value it, where do we start? Where do we go from? Do we create our own space? Do we remain in the fringe and and develop ourselves? Where do we go from here?
It's not possible. I mean, you cannot do without the audience. I believe the greatest problem actually is it has to do with cultural orientation. I believe the world is opening up, and people also need to open up to different cultures and begin to accept people for who they are, and begin to accept them for their uniqueness in terms of culture, and begin to also appreciate the different cultures that we have in the world. I mean, the world is a great platform of varieties, and I believe the God we have is a God of variety. He created people differently, and so it is just to begin to learn to accept each other in terms of the uniqueness of our different cultures, and in that way begin to appreciate each other how we do. It calls for a big heart, and I believe that the American society needs to develop that big heart to accept cultures the way they are. That's the way I think about it.
It's much easier said than done. I mean, I think so many people do want to have the heart, right? And they want to know, but there's so much education that needs to happen. You know, we've talked about curatorial re-education. So in the case of this piece that we did, one of our goals was really to educate in some way through our curation of different cultures in a space, to show people really at the bottom of it what we love about the cultures that we come from. And it requires, it's a lot of responsibility on us as the artists, and also on people to be open and receptive, because just being open is not enough. There's a certain, I don't know, readiness that one needs to have.
I believe that requires some kind of, some level of education.
Yes.
You know, to be able to open up.
There are categories that I'm not even thinking about, you know,
Yes.
because they're things that I wouldn't encounter in my own culture. So that's the educational component.
Is that where higher ed comes in?
Yeah.
Maybe that's where higher ed just be the perfect place to educate people.
Right.
And that is a tough job to do, because we're going to have a situation where we're bringing non-mainstream people to do this educating. And I can already tell you that I do not feel great being somebody who is at the forefront of doing this education. It's really tough. Many black people will tell you that being that person that is a black person who is bringing this something different is not fun. We want it to be fun. We think it's great. We see that it can be good. But we are going to put ourselves in the battlefront every day, and it's tough. But sir, we are excited to talk to you. And so, this episode is just great because we've had a lot of wisdom from you. And I think we'll continue this conversation. We do have more podcast episode coming in the future, and we think you shouldn't be a stranger. We want you back just to talk about, probably next time we can go into like what happens in classrooms in Nigeria, you know, how we teach dance. Kate and I are super, super grateful. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sinclair. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so
Kate,
much, Professor.
for the opportunity.
It's been wonderful meeting you
thank you.
finally, and you know, we appreciate your mentorship. I know that, you know, you've come up so much in our conversations and in the book as well. So we're just thrilled that you made it into the book, and that also you were able to read it, and you know, that we were able to find this connection. It means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Have a good Sunday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you all for joining us today. We had a wonderful conversation with Professor Chris Ugolo. And next episode, we will be talking about our collaboration and how we have created this model for collaboration where we can talk about issues of equity and diversity in the dance field. Hope you'll join us.